and welcome back to Shade Podcast with me, Lou Mensah, and our 9th series where we'll explore the influences that shape Black contemporary art today. Inspired by the tradition of the harmony between the lyrical and the visual, these artist conversations reveal the people and the sounds that inspire their practice. There's a playlist to accompany the series, which was created for you by my guests. So enjoy this convening of spirits to mark the end of the year. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Helene Love-Allotey. Helene is head of sale and a specialist in modern and contemporary African art at Bonhams. A graduate of SOAS in London, Helene joined Bonhams in 2016. Partly Ghanaian, Helene travels to Ghana regularly and specialises on art from that region. Her expertise also extends to 20th century African photography, all of which we touch on in our conversation. Helene is such a creative force and so knowledgeable on art from the continent. In our conversation, we cover her early years as an art handler through to today, and she tells us why she created African Art History, the Instagram page, Fill in the Gaps within art history. She encourages us to visit Bonhams for their exhibitions, so do look in the show notes for details. And be sure to listen to the end where Helene recommends some excellent tunes from the continent that continue to inspire her. And we start our conversation hearing about a moment where she was talking with her SOAS tutor 8 years ago, which led her on the journey to her current role at Bonhams.
I studied history, and in my first year, it's funny because I'm from London, lived in London my whole life, and my education was, now I'm older, sort of realised it's very sort of narrow and minded and very focused and very Western. And I ended up going to SOAS, and all of a sudden it was like, learn about, South Asian cultures, Africa and Middle East and East Asia and Southeast Asia. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't learned about any of this in the past. And I was just so excited and I just loved every single minute of it. And by my third year, I was very much narrowed down on Africa and African history, particularly Western and Southern Africa. And that's when I did an open option in African art history. And then that's what led me into my current role at Bonhams, really, because my professor, Charlie Gore, I went to him and was like, I really don't know what I'm doing. Where do I go from here? Like, what do I do? And one of his old students actually was at Bonhams doing South Asian, like sort of contemporary South Asian art, like Indian art. And she was quite enjoying it, doing well there. So he said that's something you could think about. I sort of applied for loads of different roles and positions. And I ended up getting a job as an art handler at Bonhams. Back in the day, they actually called them porters, which is a little bit of an archaic term.
It really is.
Yeah, it's terrible. And so I actually started in 2015, straight after graduation, as an art handler, which was a really great experience because I was working at Bonhams and loads of different sales, installing all the artworks, being very hands-on, which was something I didn't think, again, that I would ever be qualified to do. And it was a really wonderful experience to be able to sort of handle art of various different types. I'm talking about clocks, I'm talking about Netsuke, Japanese art, pictures, impressionist, contemporary art. I was learning how to handle so many different objects, and I was meeting so many different people that after 6 months, I got an opportunity to intern with the Modern and Contemporary African Art Department, get to handle all the different artworks that we sell, which I think is the best thing ever. And that is how I sort of interact with artists. So on the day-to-day basis, my main sort of role is valuing artwork and getting artworks in for sale. So we do 2 auctions a year in London, and we have to sort of actively consign throughout the year for those sales. And it's great because my interactions are with artworks and sometimes artists, not so much since we're sort of secondary market, but a lot of collectors, And I think that is the really cool part of my job because we meet so many different people selling for a variety of different reasons, but they all have very different stories as to how they've acquired the art that they want to sell. And it is so interesting. We get a lot of clients who bought the works back in the 60s, or their parents bought the works back in the day and they've inherited them. And sometimes these clients know the artist personally from the past and they have all the stories that come with it. And
Wow.
it's really interesting to hear. Yeah, because I did an auction recently. It was called Abuja, Ladikwali and the Art of Clay.
Oh, wow, Ladikwali.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know. Oh, so that was one of my favorite auctions. So I put together this auction of Abuja pottery from the 1960s and 1970s and really tried to highlight the women makers and also just, the makers from Abuja because it's kind of tangled with this sort of colonial history, which I try to sort of navigate around, which is very difficult. And it was a great auction. And, there was one client in particular who remembers buying the works from Laddie herself. I remember when she told me, I just couldn't believe it, to be honest. It was so cool. And she was really, the client was very young at the time. And they basically went to this Abuja pottery sort of training center to buy some works. And it was just basically like a shop. It was, but what was so cool was that she'd kept everything that she'd bought as a sort of teenager, maybe. I think she was very young, and she kept it all, and she really treasured all the things that she had purchased, and she remembered the interaction so well. For me, it was really interesting because, there's been, Jara Das did an amazing exhibition at Two Temple
Yes.
Place.
Yeah, she's been on
Oh,
the show. That was
yes,
amazing. Yes.
and she is incredible, and she's done so much to highlight Laddie Kwali's work. But other than that, really, it's very hard sometimes to find about Abuja pottery in general without the sort of Michael Cardew link, and to find out, even, it sounds ridiculous, but we had quite a few different makers, and it was really hard to find their birth dates and if they're still alive or not. And for me, that was just wild. And so it was really nice to hear this client talk about her experience firsthand of acquiring these works and being there. And, we get approached with artworks, say like Gerard Sokoto will have one of his paintings from pre-apartheid before he went into exile. And to have a painting like that is so special. And
Yeah.
it's such a huge part of history. We get all kinds of different artworks where the history is just so important. And it's really about championing that and also making sure that people are aware of that it exists. I think that's one of the best things about our auction, and it's something that people aren't aware of, but when we're on view, people can come in and view the works for free, and it's so funny. People just don't realize that they can do that.
Yeah.
And I get it because, auctions are a very intimidating
Yes.
atmosphere. And it's very hard to feel like you can just walk in and belong and that you can just come in and see these artworks and you don't have to buy and you don't have to bid. But, these are spaces and that you can come into and view the works before they all disappear. And I think it's great because we get such a unique variety of artworks. Africa is a huge continent with such a varied and rich and deep history, and we get artworks where at the moment, sadly, they probably still aren't on view at main big sort of established art galleries. And so these are artworks where I think they're really important, but people could come in and see them firsthand because they're so rare.
This is your invitation from
Yes,
Helena, please, to come
please.
in and view these works, okay? I'll be putting the
Honestly,
details in the podcast description of where Bonhams is and where you can go and see all these wonderful works.
oh, that would be great because I think that's the one thing for me. It's challenging the stereotype of African art, and it's also challenging what people think and opening up people's eyes and realizing that artworks such as these exist. And I think we're very much caught on sometimes contemporary African art and what's being made now and the artists that exist now, which obviously is so wonderful and so great, but I think there's this huge vacuum of the past of people not quite realizing all the different amazing artists and makers out there from the past, from the continent.
Well, you also started an Instagram page which is sharing your love of modern and contemporary African art with audiences on social media. Tell us a little bit about why you started that, firstly, and how you decided to sort of bring everything together to share it in this way.
So yeah, this is my little side hustle. I get to see so much and I get to see so many people, and I'm learning in a way that maybe isn't accessible for everyone else. And I thought, well, rather than gatekeep this, why don't I make this accessible to a wider audience? And let me start creating posts on this page where people can come and view different artists, different mediums from across the continent, and they can see things that they may like that they don't know about. Because I'm so aware that our education, I mean, I'm hoping it's changing, but certainly when I was at school, I don't think I learned about any art from outside of Europe or America and the UK, to be honest. The rest of
Mm,
the world just didn't count.
mm,
And I found that really deeply frustrating, and I find it really frustrating now. I mean, when you say African art, I think a lot of people still think about sort of masquerades and masks, and that's the sort of art we're presented with at the British Museum. And and so I'm just trying to sort of challenge that. So I've created this Instagram to make it more accessible and to include women artists that exist in the 60s and the 70s, and really cool sculptors. And I've started to look at exhibitions from the past that focused maybe on African art that people may not be aware of in London, because I think sometimes we are so focused on what's happening now, but there's some really cool things that took place in the 80s and the
mm.
90s, and all kinds of really interesting ideas were about. Going to start posting on these really cool festivals that took place
Yes,
post independence in Africa and different African countries.
yes.
So I'm really excited about that, and different art movements, in
Mm,
art schools. I think there's a really big thing about sort of, I think people think art schools, they think of art schools here and maybe in
mm,
America, but there's some really established and really cool art movements and art schools within Africa itself that have produced some really incredible artists. So
mm.
this hopefully is a really helpful resource for people.
As people have that thirst for knowledge and education, of course, that's going to affect interest, which is going to affect prices and sales. So I just wonder, like, from your perspective, what are you seeing at the moment in terms of this increased appetite for interest from buyers and collectors for modern and contemporary African art? How's that affecting the way you work? How's that affecting the artists that you're working with? Just sort of that whole kind of interaction.
It's been really interesting. It's been, I mean, I've been now at Bonhams for 8 years, so I've really seen a lot and seen how the trends in general in the art market have always sort of changed a little bit. And since I've been there, African art, particularly contemporary African art, has always been seen as very trendy.
Mm,
And every year, there's always an article that comes out about
mm,
African art on the rise. And it's very interesting to see that it's constantly sort of something that's on the rise. So we've got a long way to go in terms of art market wise.
mm,
Once we get the exhibitions happening more frequently, big main art
mm,
institutions, and once we have had a sort of trend, let's say, recently of contemporary African art being very popular, but it has to be sort of sustainable. It's a big sort of cycle, and the increase of art fairs, which is really great. But that again, everything has to be kind of sustainable and feeds into one another. Education again is a really big point.
and at the time of kind of like global financial crises, as we perpetually see go in cycles as well, we see that collectors go for what are considered more safe bets.
The collector base is constantly diversifying, and I'm getting new people coming to me every day looking for all different types. I think sometimes the trends can be so sort of niche and focused that can be a little bit more difficult. But I think in
Mm,
general, I think a lot of people, museums and galleries, I think all realizing that actually their permanent collections could be a little bit more diverse. I think lots of collectors are diversifying their collections too. And I think that's been really interesting. I think there's this shift that's happening, and a good important shift. And I think that's definitely going to have a domino effect on sort of the wider sort of market as such,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really great. I think the contemporary market is slightly different, perhaps, because we've seen recently with figurative art that was very popular in the past 2 years. The history is so vast and there's so much going on that actually people are looking for various different things. There's a lot of people looking for works in the past or general clay. I noticed the popularity of Lucy Rhee and Hans Koper,
Yes.
and that's really naturally sort of fed into sort of my passion and interest in the Abuja pottery. And I think a lot of ceramics collectors have definitely noticed that too and have been looking towards that. Really cool curators doing some amazing exhibitions. Then
Yes.
you've got some really interesting collectors and art fairs on the continent and not on the continent doing some really incredible things. And also, I thought about this earlier because I thought it was such a strange, I don't know, I thought it was quite a strange thought, but when I first started, I think I used to see everyone in the art world as older than me and quite established. And now I'm seeing people that are my age making waves in the industry that are all on the sort of same wave.
Yes, I'm
It's
thinking of curators like Andrea Emelife, who's been
yeah,
on the show.
yeah.
Amazing curators like you lot are killing it. You're really
It's
moving everything forward.
we can relate to one another on a different sort of level about the challenges that we've also faced within this industry and maybe
Yes.
what we want to see and slightly bridging that gap between the generations too, because it's really interesting. And I think that's really helping the sort of rise of contemporary African art, say, because there is much more focus as well and on the continent and the creatives on the continent who are doing incredible things.
How do you see the effect of like highly visible collectors? I'm thinking about, our household names and how, what the effect is of those kind of collectors on the industry as a whole. Sometimes the concern was that prices can be driven up to such an extent. Therefore, there's
Mm.
going to be again, that's going to affect sustainability. So I'm thinking, obviously of the Jay-Z's and the Alicia Keys and her husband. What's it,
Oh
Swizz
yeah,
Beatz?
Swizz Beats, yeah.
Yeah, who's having a show in having a show of their collection soon.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Brooklyn,
yeah.
yeah.
I think that obviously that's amazing for visibility and uplift. But when we've had discussions surrounding in the podcast about these kind of visible buys, again, the concern is the trends and the effect. But can you see the effect of these kind of when news comes out of these collectors when they have a show or they buy a new piece or they're photographed with it, like Jay-Z with his Basquiat? I know that's not
Oh
I know
yeah.
that's not Afro.
No, but it's an example of a collector, being so open definitely has an effect because people all of a sudden are like, oh my gosh, they have
Right,
so and so. And,
right.
it creates a little bit of a, well, maybe I want that too. Who is this person in this art collection? And the same for exhibitions, when there's an exhibition of someone, everyone goes, oh my God, this person. And it creates a bit of hype. It definitely has a knock-on effect. It's interesting though, because I deal with collectors every single day. Most of the time, they just feel very private about things. It's very personal to them.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me because more often than not, they're not. And I don't know, like when you just said, some big ticket collectors earlier,
Mm.
I'm sure some people in their brain are thinking of a certain type of person. And actually, there are some collectors out there which don't fit that mold necessarily. And I think it's really helpful for those sort of people to be open because then it can inspire people to collect or feel like they can collect.
Yes.
It's very interesting actually because I had one collector come in to my sale in October and they were telling me about how it was quite difficult to sort of buy in a gallery or be taken seriously in that regard and be a collector because they didn't fit sort of the mold. I
Yeah.
think people assumed that when they walked into the gallery, they weren't a buyer, sort of thing. That was the attitude. And I think sometimes it's really helpful for some collectors to be open to sort of, yeah, inspire others to feel like they can do it. And of course they can collect art. It's, you don't have to be a certain type of person to do it. And I think that's really, really important. So I think it can be inspirational in different ways. That's what I really believe. But it does have a knock on effect, like you said, when a very well known person takes an Instagram of artwork, then boom, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, it creates a lot of hype. And I think that can be really interesting. But I also think it can be quite helpful because it makes certain people look towards something that they might not have taken another glance at previously.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting this upcoming show, at the Brooklyn Museum. I think and to see what people take on it and what they've got in their collection and see what they show.
I'm thinking about the presences that surround objects, the making of objects, and I just think, gosh, you must be surrounded by so much of the artists, their lives, their thoughts, their habits, like their practice, what part of their lives they were in when they created these works. And you must hear the stories as well. And that's just so interesting to me. And I just wonder what it's like for you to be surrounded by all of that. Do you feel those presences as you work?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting way of thinking about things because I do have an office job
Yeah.
and I am at my desk. But then our office is kind of unique because we have all our artworks around us. We'll be looking at an artwork, say like a painting, and sometimes you can see their fingerprint in the artwork, which is very cool. And, I think a lot about being a viewer in an art gallery and how you've got that sort of rope or that alarm that they put
Yeah.
in. And you can never get up close. You can never see anything close. And I don't know why I'm getting so angry about it. I think I think it's fair enough. But it's quite nice to sort of see the details sometimes and really look at things because you can spot all kinds of different things. You can spot when an artist has painted over something, or sometimes, we do condition reports and there's a hair embedded in the paint, and more often than not, it's their hair. But it's really special, actually. It's just, yeah, it's a real glimpse into their sort of studio life or their life in general. And even, when, earlier I sort of mentioned Gerard Sokoto and having his work pre-apartheid before he was in exile. And then it's really interesting to handle his works from the 70s and, later on in his life in Paris and when he was in exile, and how paint is typically for his work always sort of got cracula running through it, but it's quite
Mm.
stable, but it's always got cracula. And that's because he used not very good paints when he was in Paris. Or I find that really interesting. And then you see, well, that's because his circumstances have changed. And, and then all of a sudden you end up, going down a slight rabbit hole of all these sort of stories. But it's interesting because I see so much, you see, yeah, a real feel for maybe what someone went through or their life.
I'm wondering if you could share with us like the artists, gallerists, musicians, or movements that you can just touch upon briefly to let us know who's inspired you.
Is Ladi Kwali
Yeah.
because when I did that auction, like I said, I'm a specialist in what I do, but I am always learning. And to learn about her was very special. And her history and her story is very tied up with the arrival of Michael Cardew, who was a British ceramicist and potter. He first of all went to Ghana and then he went to Nigeria. And then he set up this Abuja Pottery Training Centre. And it's quite a colonial move, if I'm honest. Let's sort of educate people on how to make pottery. But, where he went, there were people making pots anyway. And it was, it's very interesting. Nadi Kwali it's very matrilineal sort of history. A lot of women were typically making these beautiful and amazing water vessels. And that's what she's known for making. So when you Google Ladi Kwali, that would be the thing that comes up. And so she was already making these in the Gwari
Mm.
tradition, which is where she's from. And I think it's been really inspiring to learn about the fact that she stuck with her practice and how she made these pots, because when he opened this training center, he introduced the wheel and how to throw. But these water vessels are all hand built, and the women artists in particular, the women makers, and the men makers too, stuck with this practice of hand building them. And that for me, the sort of, I don't know, stubbornness, and the fact that this was very much this is how we do things, and okay, we will try sort of, your technique, don't get me wrong, but we're going to stick with our technique. And I really enjoyed that. And I found that quite inspiring. I'm a huge fan of Samuel Fosso.
Yeah.
I love his photography so much. So fortunate to have gone to his exhibition in Paris a couple of years ago. And that was honestly, I think, one of the best exhibitions I'd been to, because it was a retrospective of his work. So you really saw all the different types of photography he was doing. And with Samuel Fosso, it's self-portraits, it's himself. He turns the lens on himself. And it can be quite satirical
Yes.
and quite funny as well, Yeah, and same for James Barner as well. I think his journey as a photographer, I also find quite inspirational. He was taking photographs of Kwame Nkrumah. So he was at the top of his game throughout his life, but he was recognized far later on. He's in his 90s now, and he's only just started to have exhibitions. But I love that sort of lifelong perseverance.
As you were talking about James Barner and Samuel Fosso, I was thinking about Felicia Aban as well, another photographer. I think she was, was it the first Ghanaian woman to have a studio?
Yeah.
We don't know enough about these women. And I only really knew about her work because my auntie was like, oh yeah, Felicia back home. Yeah, she used to take pictures. And I was like, what?
That is crazy. Come on. Tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. It's so crazy. And I'm like, okay, I'm just getting an education, just from auntie, just talking about normal, local, everyday stuff. And I just think all of those stories are coming through the work that we're doing, the art that we're seeing, and elevating the stories of our ancestors that are being carried through the works that are in your life. I think that's it's like holding treasure. And that's why I wanted to speak to you today, because I just think that your knowledge is so valuable. But as we're winding down the conversation now, and we're winding down towards the end of the year, I'm just wondering what art or music from the continent or beyond is part of that settling down process for you at the end of the year.
I think when you work in art, there's sometimes moments where you have to really make an effort to enjoy art for yourself and not let it become work focused and work orientated. And so, recently the lovely, lovely team at Hastings Contemporary invited me down for a talk. And of course, it was a really great exhibition by Nengi Imuku. And that technically is very obviously linked to my job. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a couple of days off and I'm going to make it into a long weekend and I'm going to make the most out of this experience. And it was also the most incredible talk. That for me was sort of the first sort of moment of it was like a nice sort of way to start December.
Yeah,
It
nice.
was really nice and it was a really good sort of still moment. But
Beautiful.
also I think it's really important. I love going to galleries and sort of, running around on my lunchtime or after work and going to different openings and talks and things. And then I also like to do things that are really different and not so connected to my job. And I also collect African vinyl whenever I'm in a charity shop or a vinyl sort of record shop. And I just stick on a vinyl and just chill out and read for a bit. So I've got a few with me here. My boyfriend very kindly got me Coco. But they're a more recent band. And I'm gutted because I was supposed to see them last week and their gig got cancelled. But they're a really fun band. One of the most really brilliant gigs I went to years back, somewhere in Shoreditch. But it was very cool and it was quite arty. And it was just, they're a really great band. I love OCBisa just because their record covers are so strange. They're just a bit crazy and I love them. I've got Ebro Taylor, classic sort of high life. Balaji, absolutely adore Balaji. One of the best gigs, if not the best gig I think I ever went to at Rich Mix in Shoreditch with my mum and my boyfriend. It was a good trio, but honestly, it was one of the best gigs I've ever been to. It's all encompassing, his photography, the visuals, the outfits, the way he presents himself, the band, the music, everything. Just to die for. Honestly, it's so good. So that is one of my favorites. Couldn't recommend Balaji more. Then I've actually picked up a Festac record. Festac being one of the iconic art festivals in Nigeria in 1977, and that's a post that I'm hopefully going to do soon. Yeah, and I picked up this in a secondhand shop. It was great, and it's got all the music that was played at the time.
Oh, wow.
It's really, really, really cool. And I think it's live recording, so it's great. So yeah, that's a really special one. And then there's one here as well. So I went to an art gallery a couple of years back, Unit, and they had a show on. And for the opening, they had got Kanda Bongo Man to play. And I absolutely love Kanda Bongo Man. And I found his record in a record shop back where I used to live with my mum. And I don't think they I don't think they knew Kanda Bongo Man, but I definitely did. And I was like, I'm definitely picking this up. And yeah, I've just got a few others. Homowo by Bassa Bassa, High Life Music vinyl. Homowo is a festival that takes place roughly sort of every August in Accra. It's a Ga festival, and so it's very special to me. And it travels throughout every sort of community in Accra. So one week it's in one part, then the next week it travels to the next. And so it means a lot to me because that's where my family are from, and we take part in it every single year. And so when I saw this record, I was like, oh my God, I just have to get it regardless of how it sounds. But luckily it sounds good too. And for me, it's really about sort of emphasizing the creativity of the continent throughout the years from past to present, really.
Yeah, amazing. All of those sounds are going to go on our playlist. Thank you so much for that, because that's wonderful for the audience and for me personally. I know who I'm going to come to for my music recommendations
Oh, well, yeah.
now. Honestly, because I am not a muso, but when anything good comes to me, that's it. I'll just listen to it for the rest of my life. So I'm coming to you, Helene.
Oh, well, you can join me and my mum at some gigs, honestly, and my boyfriend. We're always at them.
Yes, please. What a treat.
I get my inspo from them as well. So it's pretty great to sort of have this sort of, and I'm glad I could pass it on. So hopefully you like some of them.
Thank you so much, Helena, for your time, your knowledge, your joy, your enthusiasm for your work. It's truly infectious, and it's just really brightened my day speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I've loved every single second of it. It's been wonderful.
Thanks all for listening to Shade Podcast with the brilliant Helene Love-Allotey. I was so captivated by her love for African art and music and her determination to bring modern and contemporary African art to the forefront to be appreciated by everyone. Subscribe to Shade Podcast to listen to all the episodes in this series. Also explore Shade Art Review on Substack, joining thousands of art-curious listeners like you who are discovering more about the work of visual artists from the Black diaspora. There you'll find art listings, comment, artist spotlights and guest posts, and free subscriptions are available. But for the full Shade Art Review experience, sign up today to receive 20% off your annual membership, an offer which is available for the duration of this series. This series of Shade Podcasts was produced and hosted by me, Lou Mensah, and mixed by Tess Davidson. See you next time.